The chime of my doorbell echoed at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was in my study, a glass-walled room overlooking the Denver skyline, reviewing blueprints for a new community revitalization project. My son, Leo, was away in San Diego for a national coding decathlon. The house was enveloped in a profound quiet, the kind of deep, intentional peace I had spent more than 2 decades meticulously engineering for myself. The doorbell's sound was a soft, melodic tone I'd chosen myself, a world away from the grating buzz of the house where I was raised. Everything in this home, from the vast panes of glass that served as walls to the sleek, cool marble of the kitchen island, was a testament to the life I had constructed from the ground up, a life that was entirely under my control. Before I go any further, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. I walked toward the front door, assuming it was a package delivery running late. I glanced at the security monitor by the door. The screen displayed 2 figures standing on my illuminated porch, their features slightly blurred by the warm, ambient light, an older man and woman. They looked familiar in a way that felt distant and faded, like a half-forgotten photograph from a life that wasn't mine. My heart didn't pound or race. It simply delivered one solid, heavy thump against my ribcage, a dull knock of acknowledgement. And then it was still. I pulled the door open. My father, Arthur Caldwell, stood before me. His shoulders were more stooped than I recalled, but his jaw was clenched with the same unyielding sense of entitlement I knew so well. He was dressed in a polo shirt and khaki pants that were clearly expensive, but looked stiff and unnatural on him. My mother, Helen, hovered just behind him, her hand gripping a designer handbag like a shield. Her face was a carefully constructed mask of pleasant concern, the very same one she wore for church gatherings, school functions, and the day she sat silently in the living room as my life was dismantled. 22 years, not a single phone call, not one letter. They had ceased to exist in my universe, and I had diligently ensured I was absent from theirs. Now, here they were, on the porch of my Denver home, a home I owned under a sky they had no business sharing with me. "Lena," my father said. His voice, raspy with age, carried the same commanding tone. It was a declaration, not a greeting, an order. "Hello, Arthur," I replied, my own voice even and calm. I did not use the word dad. I had surgically excised it from my vocabulary long ago. My mother edged forward, her practiced smile stretching thinly across her face. "Lena, my dear, it's been so long. We happened to be in town, and we just had to come and see you." "I see," I said. I remained motionless, a sentinel at the threshold. I made no move to invite them inside. The cool, polished stone of the foyer felt solid beneath my feet. I was the barrier they had to overcome, and I had become an expert at being a barrier. My father's patience, a resource I knew to be exceptionally limited, quickly wore thin. He gestured irritably toward the house behind me. "Well, are you going to let us in? It was a long drive. We're here to see him." I knew exactly who he meant. I had always known this moment would eventually arrive. I had spent a lifetime preparing for it, building my entire existence as a fortress against this very intrusion. But the abstract knowledge of a threat is a far cry from facing it on your own doorstep. "See who?" I asked. My tone was one of genuine bewilderment, as if they were lost tourists asking for a landmark that had never existed. My mother's smile faltered. She shot a panicked glance at my father. He took charge. "Let's not play these little games, Lena. We know about your son. We read the article about his achievements. He is our grandson. We have a right to see our grandson. A right." The word just hung there in the crisp Colorado air. It was a word they had always cherished, a concept they believed was theirs to wield. They had a right to a flawless daughter. They had a right to an impeccable family name. They had a right to bulldoze any inconvenience that threatened their picture-perfect world. I looked at my father's irate, demanding face. I looked at my mother's anxious, crumbling composure. For the first time, I saw them not as the titans who had shattered my world at 17, but as what they were now. Two small, grasping people on a stranger's porch, trying to lay claim to a piece of a life they had thrown away like garbage. A strange, profound calm settled over me. It was as if the final missing piece of the armor I'd been forging for 22 years had just clicked into place. There was no pain. There was no anger. There was only absolute clarity. I held their gazes, letting the silence stretch until they began to shift uncomfortably. Then I gave them the truth. "What child?" I asked. The confusion that washed over their faces was instantaneous and total. My father's mouth flapped open and shut. My mother's hand fluttered to her chest. They had arrived with a strategy, a script in which they would demand, guilt, and force their way back into a narrative they had written me out of. I had just informed them they were reading from the wrong book entirely. "What are you talking about?" My father sputtered, his voice cracking with frustration. "Your son, our grandson. I have no child that belongs to you," I said. The words felt cleaner and more honest than anything I had ever spoken. "The child you're referring to, the one who made me a disgrace in your world, never existed for you. You signed that right away 22 years ago. You made absolutely sure of it." I took a step back, my hand finding the cool metal of the doorknob. Their stunned, uncomprehending faces were the last thing I saw before I swung the door shut, sealing off the past and leaving them alone in the quiet twilight. The house I grew up in was perpetually cold, not in a literal sense. My father was obsessive about the thermostat. It was a coldness that seeped from the walls and lived in the silences. It was a house built on appearances. The lawn was immaculately manicured, the windows were always spotless, and the family portraits arranged on the mantel showed a smiling, flawless family. We were the Caldwells. We were respectable. At 17, I was well aware that my main purpose in life was to avoid smudging that perfect picture. I earned high marks. I was a leader on the school's speech and debate team. I was quiet, and I did everything I could to be the daughter they expected. Then, in the spring of my junior year, I found out I was pregnant. I knew the picture was about to be obliterated. I first told my boyfriend, Kevin Davenport. We were parked in his car overlooking a reservoir, the late afternoon sun glittering on the water. He held my hand, told me he loved me, and swore we would figure it out together. He said his parents would be supportive. He was popular, handsome, and his family was wealthy. For a few fragile days, his promises were the only things keeping me from falling apart. I trusted him. I trusted in us. The most dreadful part was telling my parents. I chose a Sunday evening after dinner. My father was settled in his leather armchair with the newspaper, and my mother was clearing the plates with her usual quiet, precise movements. The air in the room was dense with the unspoken laws of our household. Don't cause a scene. Don't have problems. Don't be a disappointment. I stood in the center of the living room, my hands twisting into knots. "Mom? Dad? I have to tell you something." My father lowered the paper, his eyes assessing me over his reading glasses with an expression of faint annoyance, as if I were an unwelcome interruption. "What is it, Lena?" My mother paused on her way to the kitchen, a stack of dinner plates held perfectly still. "Is this about your grades? I saw that last chemistry score." "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's something else." I inhaled deeply. The words were like stones in my throat. "I'm pregnant." Silence. Not a peaceful quiet, but a sudden violent vacuum that sucked all the air and warmth from the room. My father deliberately folded his newspaper, setting it on the end table. He removed his glasses. My mother hadn't moved, the plates in her hands the only thing anchoring her in place. My father was the first to speak. His voice was low, controlled, and colder than any winter night. "What did you just say?" "I'm pregnant," I repeated, a little louder. I looked at his face, desperately searching for a flicker of concern, a trace of fatherly instinct. There was nothing. His face was granite. "You are a stain on this family," he said. The words weren't yelled. They were delivered like a sentence, a final, unappealable judgment. "You have brought nothing but shame on us, on me." Tears started to burn my eyes. I turned to my mother, my last hope. "Mom?" She finally moved, carrying the plates to the kitchen and setting them down with a sharp clatter. She wouldn't look at me. She looked at the wall, the sink, anywhere but at her own daughter. "What did you expect was going to happen, Lena?" she asked, her voice thin and brittle. "All of our friends. What are we supposed to tell people? It was always about them, their reputation, their friends, their perfect portrait. I was just a flaw in the glass. Kevin and I started, my voice trembling. "We're going to work it out. He said he'd help." My father let out a short, ugly laugh. "Kevin Davenport, do you have any idea who the Davenports are? They will bury you. They will erase you. And so will we." He rose to his feet. He was not a tall man, but at that moment he was a giant of wrath. He strode to the front door and threw it open. The mild evening air that rushed in felt like a cruel joke against the ice in the room. "Get out," he said. I stared at him, the words not computing. "What? You heard me. Get out of my house. You are no longer my daughter." My mother finally turned, her face ashen. Her eyes were dry. There was only a flat, hollow resignation. "Arthur, perhaps we should just—" "There's nothing to think about, Helen," he snapped, his voice finally cracking with rage. "She made her bed. She can lie in it. I will not have this kind of filth living under my roof." The word hit me like a physical blow. I flinched, my entire body recoiling. I looked from his face to hers, silently pleading for one of them to stop this, to say it was all a terrible misunderstanding, to say anything that sounded remotely like love. They said nothing. My father marched over, seized my arm, and dragged me toward the open door. His grip was like iron. "Go on, get out!" He shoved me out onto the porch. I stumbled, catching my balance on the railing. I had nothing. No wallet, no phone, no coat, just the clothes on my back. The door was still open. I could see the familiar hallway, the stairs leading to my room, to my entire life. My father walked to the mantelpiece. He picked up the family photo from our last vacation. Me, him, my mother, all of us in coordinated outfits beaming for the camera. He looked at it, then deliberately turned it face down, pressing my smiling image against the cold, dark wood. Then he walked back and slammed the door. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of my world ending. I stood on that porch for I don't know how long. Time had warped and dissolved. The sky darkened. Streetlights flickered to life. I could hear the muffled sound of a TV from inside the house. My house. My former house. I was 17. I was pregnant. And I had just been deleted. The first person I tried to reach was Kevin. I walked for what felt like miles, my mind shrouded in a numb fog of disbelief. The familiar tree-lined streets of my neighborhood now seemed alien and menacing. Every glowing window was a reminder of a home that was no longer mine. I finally found a payphone at a gas station. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely push the buttons for the number I knew by heart. It rang once, then a flat, robotic voice announced, "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." No longer in service. I tried again, same result. Cold, sharp panic began to slice through the numbness. He wouldn't do this. He promised. We were a team. I used my last quarter to call his family's landline. His mother answered. Her voice, once so kind and welcoming, was now pure ice. "Mrs. Davenport, it's Lena. I know who this is," she said coldly. "Kevin isn't available. Can you just tell him I called? It's really important. I have to talk to him." "Listen to me, young woman," she said, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "My son has a very bright future, a good college, then law school. We are not going to let a little mistake like you derail that. Do not call this number again." The line went dead. I stood there with the receiver pressed to my ear, listening to the monotonous hum of the dial tone. That was it. His parents had stepped in. They had erased me just as ruthlessly as my own parents had. Abandoned. Again. But a tiny, foolish flicker of hope remained. Maybe Kevin didn't know. Maybe they took his phone, locked him in his room. If I could just see him face to face, he would make it right. He had to. His family lived in a sprawling, gated community on the wealthy side of town. It took me the rest of the night to walk there. The sun was just beginning to rise when I arrived at the imposing iron gates. I told the security guard I was there to see Kevin Davenport. He spoke into a receiver, then gave me a look that was a toxic mix of pity and disdain. "The Davenports have instructed me not to permit you on the property. They said, if you do not leave, you will be arrested for trespassing." I was standing on a perfectly manicured strip of grass outside a fortress of money and influence. I was 17, pregnant, homeless, and I was now officially a criminal threat. The absurdity of it all was almost enough to make me laugh. Instead, I just turned around and started walking away. The following weeks dissolved into a singular, continuous nightmare of trying to exist. I learned about real hunger. It wasn't just a pang, it was a constant, dull ache that clouded your thoughts. I learned about shame from the way people averted their eyes as I existed in public spaces. I learned about fear from the sound of footsteps behind me on a dark street, the gnawing anxiety of having no safe place to rest. Denver, the city I had always called home, was now a hostile territory. The parks, the libraries, the 24-hour diners, they were all temporary havens where I tried to become invisible. I learned to wash my hair in public sinks and how to make a single cup of tea last for hours just to be allowed to sit in a warm booth. My pregnancy was a secret I guarded fiercely, hunching over to hide the slight curve of my belly. It was both a source of terror and my only connection to another human being. This tiny, unborn person was the only reason I kept going. I had to survive for them. The final, definitive betrayal arrived about a month after I'd been cast out. I was at the public library using a computer to search for shelters when I saw an email from a law firm I didn't recognize. The attachment was a formal letter, printed on heavy, expensive paper from a lawyer representing the Davenport family. The language was cold, corporate, and brutal. It denied any and all responsibility. It referred to my claim of paternity as unsubstantiated, and it offered a one-time payment of $5,000 in exchange for my signature on a document that would relinquish all future claims and legally forbid me from ever contacting Kevin or his family again. It was a payoff, hush money, the price of my complete erasure. I sat there in the quiet library, staring at the screen. The polite, professional legalese was somehow more cruel than my father's rage. This was Kevin's answer. This was his promise. It wasn't just his parents, it was him. He had chosen his comfortable, pre-packaged future over me, over our child. He had co-signed my deletion. That was the moment something inside me fractured and reformed into something harder. The fear didn't vanish, but a cold determination grew alongside it. I was not a problem to be paid off. I was not a disgrace to be hidden away. I was a person, and I would survive. I closed the email without replying. I would not take their money. I would not sign their papers. I would not give them the satisfaction of purchasing my silence. They had stripped me of everything, my home, my love, my future, but they could not take my name. They could not take my will. As I walked out of that library into the bright, unforgiving sunlight, I was no longer just a scared, pregnant teenager. I was a survivor, and I was utterly, completely alone. That loneliness, I realized, was its own strange kind of freedom. There was no one left to let down, no one left to betray me. There was only me and the fight that lay ahead. The park bench had become my bedroom. It was hard, wooden, and unforgiving on my pregnant body, but it was set back from the main path, partially obscured by a large pine tree, offering a sliver of privacy. Some nights, I'd lie there, looking up through the branches at the city glow, pretending I was on some great adventure. But the gnawing hunger and the profound, aching loneliness always shattered the illusion. One morning, I awoke to see a pair of sensible, well-worn loafers on the pavement in front of me. I shot upright, my heart hammering with the usual spike of fear. I expected a police officer or a park ranger telling me to move along. Instead, I saw a woman. She was likely in her late 60s with a crown of short silver hair and a face etched with wrinkles that seemed to have been carved by both laughter and sorrow. She held 2 steaming paper cups. "You look like you could use this," she said. Her voice was practical, devoid of pity. Pity was an emotion I'd grown to despise. It made me feel small. I stared at her, my suspicion a hard shield. "I don't have any money." "I didn't ask for any," she countered, holding out a cup. "There's a bagel in this bag, too." My stomach growled, betraying my pride. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I took the cup, its warmth seeping into my cold hands. "Why?" I asked, my voice raspy. She sat on the far end of the bench, sipping from her own cup. "Because I used to own a small hotel a few blocks away. You learn to recognize people who are running from something and people who have nowhere left to run. You look like the second kind." Her name was Eleanor Vance. She was a widow who had run a modest independent hotel for 40 years before selling it to a larger chain. Retirement, she said, didn't agree with her. She missed the structure, the chaos, the people. We sat there for a while, drinking our coffee in silence. She didn't pry. She didn't ask for my story or how I'd ended up on a park bench. She just let me be. For the first time in months, I felt like a human being again, not just a problem to be ignored. When we were done, she stood. I still have a small apartment on the top floor of my old hotel building. It has a spare room. It also has a bed and a working shower. The new owners let me keep it. You can stay for a bit if you want. In return, you can help me sort through decades of old hotel records. It wasn't a handout. It was a transaction, a job. It was dignity. Tears I didn't know I had left welled in my eyes. I blinked hard, but they spilled over. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me yet," she said, her expression softening just a fraction. "The work is mind-numbingly boring, and I expect punctuality. That was the beginning of everything." The room she gave me was small and sparse, but it was clean, warm, and safe. It had a door with a lock. That first night, I took the longest, hottest shower of my life, washing away weeks of street grime and shame. I slept for 12 uninterrupted hours in a real bed. It was paradise. The work was as boring as Eleanor had promised. I spent my days in a dusty basement, archiving boxes of old receipts and guest ledgers. But I didn't mind. The repetitive, methodical task was a balm for my frantic mind. It gave my days a purpose. Every evening, Eleanor would cook dinner, and we'd eat together in her small, functional kitchen. Bit by bit, I started to tell her my story. I told her about my parents, about Kevin, about the baby. I braced myself for shock, for judgment. Instead, she just listened, nodding patiently. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she looked at me, her gaze clear and direct. "Betrayal is a fire," she said. "You can let it burn you to ash, or you can use it to forge yourself into steel. They gave you a gift, Lena, even if they didn't intend to. They taught you that the only person you can ever truly rely on is yourself. It's the hardest lesson, but it's the most valuable one you'll ever learn." She became my mentor. She was the mother I should have had, not soft or sentimental, but tough, pragmatic, and fiercely wise. As we sorted through the old ledgers, she taught me about business. She explained profit and loss, occupancy rates, and the art of managing people. She told me stories of economic downturns, impossible guests, and the sheer grit it took to keep a business alive. "Real power isn't about having money, Lena," she told me one night. "It's about having options. Money just buys you more of them. The goal is to build a life where no one can ever take your options away from you again. She taught me to channel my pain. Every time a wave of grief or anger threatened to pull me under, she'd give me a new task, a new ledger to balance. Don't just sit there and marinate in it, she'd say. Use that energy. Build something. Under her tutelage, the scared, broken girl on the park bench began to fade. In her place, someone new was being constructed, someone stronger, someone who understood that the world was unforgiving, but that resilience was a choice. Eleanor didn't just give me shelter, she gave me a blueprint for a new life. And she was the first person who believed I had the strength to build it. The first piece of my armor was my education. With Eleanor's steadfast encouragement, I enrolled in a program to get my GED. I studied every night in the little apartment after my days organizing records. The ambient hum of the city outside my window was no longer a threat, but a reminder of the world I was determined to conquer. Math, which I'd always found difficult, now seemed beautifully simple. It was a universe of logic and rules, a welcome respite from the chaotic emotions of my past. I passed the exam with the highest score in my testing group. Eleanor celebrated by taking me to a nice steakhouse. It was the first time I'd been in a real restaurant since being thrown out of my home. "This is your foundation," she said, raising a glass of iced tea. "Every achievement from now on is another brick in the fortress you're building. Make it high and make it strong." After my GED, I started working full-time at the hotel. The new owners, friends of Eleanor's, gave me a position at the front desk. I learned to handle irate customers, manage complex booking systems, and spot a lie from a mile away. The hotel was a microcosm of the city, and I became a student of human nature. I saw greed, kindness, desperation, and love check in and out every single day. Eleanor became my financial advisor. A portion of every paycheck went into a savings account she helped me open. "This is your freedom fund," she'd call it. When it grew large enough, she helped me make my first investment, a small fractional ownership in a commercial building downtown. It was terrifying to sign away so much of my savings, but Eleanor was unshakable. "You're not buying property, Lena. You're buying power. You're buying a piece of the city that tried to crush you." As my capital grew, so did my ambition. I started taking night classes in business administration at a community college. It was there that I met Marcus Thorne. He was a few years older, a law student working 2 jobs to fund his education. He was quiet, intense, and possessed a brilliant legal mind. We became study partners, then close friends. He understood the law not just as a set of rules, but as a system of leverage and protection. One day, I told him my entire story. He listened without a single interruption, his expression unreadable. When I was done, he simply said, "They left you with nothing. That was their biggest mistake. It means you have no weak points for them to exploit." Marcus became the architect of my legal fortress. After he graduated and passed the bar, he was the first person I hired. He helped me establish my first corporation, a shell company to manage my growing portfolio of investments. He drafted contracts that were ironclad. He taught me about trusts, liability, and the absolute necessity of a paper trail. "We will document everything," he'd say. "We will build a case so solid that no one can ever touch what is yours." He was my shield. The world was shifting. It was the late 90s, and the dot-com bubble was inflating. Eleanor, with her old-school business acumen, was wary, but I saw an opportunity. A new world was being built, one without the old money gatekeepers who had cast me out. It was a world where a great idea and relentless work could build an empire from scratch. Through an early online investment forum, I met Jia Kim. She was a coding prodigy, a socially awkward but visionary programmer who saw the future in lines of code. She was developing a new form of data encryption software. Most investors dismissed it as too niche, but I understood the deep-seated need for security. I understood the desire to protect what is yours. I invested everything I had into her startup. It was the single greatest risk of my life. Eleanor thought I was insane. Marcus drew up the paperwork with a worried frown. But I trusted Gia's genius, and I trusted my gut. Gia became the third pillar of my fortress. With my capital and business guidance, her company exploded. The encryption software became an industry standard. The returns were beyond my wildest dreams. I wasn't just financially secure anymore. I was wealthy. But it was never just about the money. It was about what the money signified: safety, independence, power. With Marcus managing the legal structures and Gia guiding my tech investments, my fortress became impregnable. Every asset was layered within a complex web of trusts. Every communication was archived. Every potential liability was analyzed and neutralized. I moved from the small apartment into a house I designed myself. A modern, secure, and intensely private space. It was a home, but it was also a command center. Years passed. I was no longer a victim. I was the CEO of my own life. My past wasn't a source of shame. It was a case study. My parents and Kevin were cautionary tales, examples of what happens when you underestimate someone. I never forgot the lessons they had taught me: betrayal, abandonment, erasure. I had used those lessons to forge my armor, and I was ready for a war I knew would one day come to my door. For years, my life was a fortress, built of work, investments, legal protections, and the quiet, steady friendship of Marcus and Gia. I was safe, successful, and in complete control. But my fortress was also empty. It was a home with no one to come home to. The silence I had once craved as a refuge started to feel like a prison. I was 29 when I realized I was pregnant again. It was an accident, the result of a brief, forgettable relationship that had fizzled out months before. But this time was different. I wasn't a terrified 17-year-old. I was a self-made woman with resources and a home. This time, I could do it right. The news didn't land as a crisis, but as a quiet, blossoming hope. This was my chance to build a family on my own terms, to give a child the unconditional love I had never received. Eleanor had passed away 2 years prior, a quiet end to a formidable life. I missed her counsel fiercely. I would sit in my large, silent house and talk to her, asking what she would do, and I knew what she'd say: stop thinking and start building. So I began to build a nursery. I painted the walls a soft, hopeful yellow. I assembled a crib. I read stacks of books on motherhood. For the first time since I was a girl, I allowed myself to be vulnerable, to hope for a future that was about love, not just defense. Then at 5 months, I lost the baby. It happened late one night, a sudden sharp pain, followed by a quiet, devastating finality. I was alone. I drove myself to the hospital, my hands steady on the steering wheel, my mind strangely calm. The doctors were kind, using gentle words like miscarriage and unfortunate. They assured me it wasn't my fault. But as I lay in that sterile white room, a profound and terrible grief washed over me. It was grief for the child I would never know, but it was also grief for the 17-year-old girl who had been so full of terror and hope. Twice now, a child had been taken from me. The first time by cruelty, the second by fate. I felt cursed, as if the universe was reinforcing the verdict my parents had passed down years ago. I was not meant to be a mother. I didn't cry in the hospital. I didn't cry on the drive home. I walked into the yellow nursery, closed the door, and sat on the floor. And then I shattered. All the pain I had walled off for more than a decade. The rejection, the abandonment, the loneliness came pouring out. I mourned the daughter I had just lost, and I mourned the child I had been, the one who was forced to become a soldier when all she wanted was a home. I stayed in that room for 3 days. Marcus and Gia called, but I didn't answer. On the third day, I stood up. I looked at the empty crib, and I heard Eleanor's voice in my head, as clear as if she were standing beside me. Betrayal is a fire. You can let it burn you to ash, or you can use it to forge yourself into steel. My grief was a fire. My loss was a fire. I could let it incinerate my hope, or I could use it. I walked out of that room with a new, unshakable resolve. Fate would not write my story. My parents would not have the final word. I would be a mother. I would build my family, and I would do it my way. The adoption process was long and invasive, forcing me to open up my life for inspection. But I was not ashamed. My past was a testament to my resilience. 2 years later, I flew to a small town in southern Colorado. I walked into a government building, and a social worker placed a tiny, 4-month-old baby boy into my arms. He had a shock of dark hair and big, curious brown eyes. He looked up at me, and his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. In that instant, the fortress around my heart dissolved. This was my son. I named him Leo Caldwell. I gave him my last name, the name I had carried through shame and into triumph. I was reclaiming it. It was no longer the name of the man who had disowned me. It was the name of Leo's mother. It was our name. Raising Leo was the single greatest project of my life. He filled my silent house with laughter and questions. He was a brilliant, inquisitive child, fascinated by how things worked. He would take apart toys and remote controls, not out of mischief, but from a deep-seated need to understand their mechanics. Gia, my friend and business partner, became his unofficial aunt. She saw his spark immediately, giving him his first computer and teaching him his first line of code when he was just 8. I gave him the childhood I never had, one of safety, encouragement, and unconditional love. There were no expectations to live up to, other than to be kind and follow his passions. His passion was technology. By the time he was 16, he was designing complex algorithms that were beyond my comprehension. He wasn't just my son, he was my legacy. A legacy of love, not blood. A legacy built from a deliberate choice, not a biological accident. His success was my success. It was the beautiful, thriving life that had grown from the ashes of my past. But I was a strategist. I had learned from Eleanor and Marcus that every strength can also be a vulnerability. Leo's brilliance made him visible. It made him a target. And I knew that somewhere out there the ghosts I had buried were watching, waiting. His success, I feared, would be the bait that would finally draw them out. The first tremor came in the form of a magazine profile. It was a feature in a major tech journal on the next generation of innovators. There, on a full page, was a photo of Leo, now 17, standing proudly in front of a whiteboard covered in complex equations, his new data compression algorithm. The article lauded his genius and mentioned his supportive single mother, Lena Caldwell, a private real estate developer and tech investor. I was immensely proud, but a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. The article made us visible. It put our names, the name Caldwell, into the public sphere. For 22 years, I had cultivated privacy. Now a spotlight was shining directly on us. A week later, the first letter arrived. It was addressed to Leo but sent to my office. The return address was a house in my old neighborhood. The handwriting was my mother's. Marcus was in my office when it came. I stared at the envelope on my desk as if it were a bomb. "They found us," I said. "We knew this day would come," he replied, his voice steady. "What's the plan?" "The plan is the same as it has always been," I said. "We are a fortress. We do not engage." I dropped the letter into the shredder, unopened. But they were relentless. A week later, an extravagant gift basket arrived at our home, filled with gadgets and a card addressed to our dearest grandson, Leo. It was signed, "With all our love, your grandparents, Arthur and Helen Caldwell." Leo was confused. "I thought your parents were gone." I had told him the truth about my past when he was old enough to understand. He knew I'd been kicked out, but I had spared him the ugliest details. He knew them as distant, abstract figures of cruelty, not as real people who might show up on our doorstep. "They are gone, sweetheart," I said, taking the card and feeding it into the shredder. "Those are just two strangers who happen to share some DNA with me. They are not your grandparents." But they didn't stop. They sent more letters, more gifts. They began leaving messages on my office voicemail, their voices thick with manufactured emotion. "Lena, please," my mother's voice would plead. "We made a terrible, terrible mistake. We just want to know our grandson. We just want a chance to be a family again." Then came the emails, not just to me, but to the general inquiry address for one of my companies. And then the social media campaign began. My mother started a Facebook page, posting old photos of me as a child alongside long, rambling essays about her heartbreak and her desperate search for her long-lost daughter and the grandson she'd never been allowed to meet. She was crafting a public narrative, casting herself as the victim. The final piece of the nightmare clicked into place a month later. An email from a name I hadn't seen in 22 years, Kevin Davenport. The message was pathetic. He wrote of failed businesses and a messy divorce. He said he'd made a terrible mistake all those years ago and thought about me and our child every day. He wanted to see me, to apologize, to be a part of our lives. I didn't respond. A week later, Marcus's legal team discovered that Kevin had been in contact with my parents. They had formed an alliance. Their strategy became sickeningly clear. They weren't just trying to guilt me anymore. They were preparing a legal assault. The official letter arrived from their new lawyer. It was a formal demand for visitation rights. They were suing me for grandparental rights, claiming I was alienating them from their only grandchild. The letter was a work of fiction, portraying me as a cruel, vindictive woman denying a loving family their rightful place. The lawsuit was their declaration of war. They had seen the article about Leo, seen the dollar signs attached to his genius. They didn't want a grandson, they wanted a winning lottery ticket. They had discarded me when I was a liability. Now that I was an asset, they wanted to claim their share. I sat in Marcus's office, the letter on the table between us. I wasn't scared, I wasn't even angry. I felt a profound ice-cold clarity. The moment I had been preparing for my entire adult life had arrived. "They think this is a fight about family," I said to Marcus. "They think they can win with emotion and public opinion." "What is it a fight about?" he asked. I looked out the window at the Denver skyline, a city I now owned a piece of. "It's a business transaction," I said, "and they have no idea how badly I am about to bankrupt them." My parents and Kevin made a fatal error. They thought they were fighting the 17-year-old girl they had thrown into the street. They had no idea who I had become. They fought with sloppy emotion and public lies. I fought with precision, technology, and overwhelming evidence. The lawsuit was filed, and the game was on. As part of the proceedings, all communication had to go through legal channels. Marcus set up a dedicated email address and phone line, all of which were recorded and archived. It was a digital trap, and they walked right into it. My mother would leave long, tearful voicemails, performing her grief for the court record. "I just want to hold my grandson," she'd weep. "Why are you so cruel to your own mother?" An hour later, Gia's team would intercept an email from that same mother to her friends, boasting that their lawyer said it was a slam-dunk case and they would soon be set for life. My father was more direct, sending threatening emails disguised as fatherly advice. "You are making a terrible mistake, Lena. You need to think about what's best for the boy. A boy needs a grandfather." We cross-referenced the timestamp of that email with a public post he made on an investment forum, bragging to strangers about his genius grandson and how the family was about to come into a lot of money. Kevin was the most reckless of all. Desperate, he sent emails directly to me, bypassing the lawyers. He pleaded, he threatened, and he tried to blackmail me with our past. In one particularly idiotic message, he outlined a settlement. If I gave him a 20% stake in Leo's future software company, he would testify that my parents were unfit, and I'd win the case. He was trying to play both sides, not realizing he was just documenting his own conspiracy to commit fraud. We collected it all. Every email, every voicemail, every social media post, every financial record we could legally obtain. Gia and her team built a meticulous timeline, a digital spiderweb of their greed and deception. It was irrefutable. It was devastating, and we kept it all hidden. We let them believe they were winning, let them build their flimsy case of lies, all while we were building a mountain of truth to bury them with. The climax came at the annual Denver Tech Summit. Leo was the keynote speaker. It was the biggest moment of his young career, where he would present his algorithm to the most powerful people in the industry. I knew my parents and Kevin would be there. They had managed to get tickets through a distant acquaintance. Their plan was to confront us publicly, to create a scene, to paint themselves as the loving grandparents being denied the chance to see their grandson shine. I had a different plan. The ballroom was packed. Leo was backstage, running through his presentation one last time. I was in the control booth with a technician. As the summit's host walked on stage to introduce the keynote, he paused. "Before we hear from the brilliant Leo Caldwell," he announced, "we have a short tribute to the people who make innovation possible, the mentors, the believers, the ones who see potential before anyone else." The ballroom lights dimmed. The giant screens on either side of the stage lit up. It began with photos of famous innovators with their mentors. Then a photo of a young Gia Kim appeared, followed by a photo of a young me. Finally, a picture of Eleanor Vance, her face strong and smiling. And then her voice filled the room, taken from an old interview I had recorded with her years ago for a business school project. Family. Her voice echoed through the massive speakers, clear and steady. People get that word all wrong. They think it's about blood. It's not. Blood is just biology. Family is about who stands by you when you have nothing left. Family is who lifts you up, not who tears you down. Family is a choice. It's the people you choose to build your life with, and the people who choose to build with you. As she spoke, a slideshow of photos played. Me and Eleanor in the old hotel kitchen. Me and Marcus in his first tiny law office. Me and Gia in her cluttered startup garage. And then, photo after photo of me and Leo. Reading him a book as a toddler, helping him with a science project, standing beside him at his first robotics competition, hugging him, laughing with him. I scanned the audience and found them. My father, my mother, and Kevin, sitting together 3 rows from the back. Their faces were frozen in utter shock. They had come for a fight, to make a scene. Instead, they were forced to sit in a dark, silent room and listen to a ghost define the one thing they had never understood. The video ended with Eleanor's final words, "You don't get to discard people, and then claim them when they become valuable. Family is not a stock you can buy low and sell high. It's a bond, and it must be earned." The screen went black. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then the room erupted in applause. They thought it was just an inspiring tribute. I knew it was the first shot in the final battle. The trap was set. Now it was time to snap it shut. The morning after the tech summit, we held a press conference. We didn't choose a fancy hotel or a corporate boardroom. We held it on the steps of the Eleanor Vance Children's Shelter, the first project my foundation had ever funded. The symbolism was deliberate. The media was in a frenzy. The emotional tribute at the summit, followed by the news of a lawsuit from my estranged parents, had created a story they couldn't resist. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. I stood at the podium, Marcus on one side and Leo on the other. Leo had insisted on being there. "I'm not a kid, Mom," he had said the night before. "This is my life, too. I'm standing with you." Marcus stepped up to the microphone first. He was calm, professional, methodical. "Good morning. We are here today to address the civil suit filed against my client, Ms. Lena Caldwell, by Mr. Arthur Caldwell, Ms. Helen Caldwell, and their associate, Mr. Kevin Davenport. They are suing for grandparental rights based on their biological connection to Miss Caldwell." He paused, letting the words settle. "Their claim is based on a lie, and we have the evidence to prove it." On a large digital screen set up behind us, a document materialized. It was a legal agreement dated 22 years ago. This is a document signed by Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell as part of a settlement with the Davenport family at that time. In it, they formally and legally relinquished any and all parental rights, responsibilities, and future claims to Ms. Caldwell and her unborn child. They did this willingly to protect their social standing. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The document, with their signatures clear as day, was undeniable. Their entire legal case had just been demolished. But Marcus wasn't done. Their motives for this lawsuit are not about family. They are about money. The screen changed, displaying a series of emails. The first was from Kevin to my father. "Once we get the settlement, my cut is 20%. We need to present a united front." The next screen showed my mother's maudlin Facebook posts next to screenshots of her private messages to friends. One read, "Our lawyer says we could get millions. Leo is worth a fortune." The evidence was overwhelming. The trap hadn't just shut, it had obliterated them. Marcus laid out the entire conspiracy, email by email, voicemail by voicemail. He exposed their greed, their lies, their pathetic attempts at manipulation. When he finished, a heavy silence fell over the crowd as reporters furiously typed. Then I stepped up to the microphone. I looked directly into the cameras, knowing they were watching. My voice was not angry or emotional. It was the calm, steady voice of a CEO presenting a final report. Leo put a supportive hand on my arm, standing tall and proud beside me. The lawsuit filed by Arthur and Helen Caldwell is based on the claim that they are the biological grandparents of my son. This is the final lie I am here to correct today. I took a deep breath. This was the final, decisive blow, the truth I had guarded for 17 years. My son, Leo Caldwell, is the greatest gift of my life. I love him more than words can express. And he is my son in every single way that matters. But he is not my son by birth. The confusion on the reporters' faces was palpable. "Leo is adopted," I said, my voice ringing with clarity. "He shares no blood with me, and he shares no blood with the people suing me for grandparental rights." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a truth so complete, so devastating, it left no room for argument. Their entire case, legal, moral, and public, was not just lost, it was a fraud. They had no claim. They had no connection. They had nothing. "They are not his grandparents," I concluded, looking straight into the camera lens, speaking directly to them. "They are strangers. Not his blood, not his family. They have no rights here. This ends today." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for them. The press conference was a public execution. The story of the greedy, fake grandparents who tried to sue their abandoned daughter for access to her adopted son went national. My parents became villains in a story they no longer controlled. Their perfect, respectable lives crumbled into dust. The community whose opinion they valued above all else turned on them. Their friends stopped calling. Their country club membership was revoked. My father's small consulting business lost every client overnight. They were forced to sell the house they had kicked me out of just to pay their legal fees. I later read in a small news brief that they moved to a retirement community in Arizona, disappearing into a quiet, shame-filled obscurity. They had finally achieved for themselves what they had done to me 22 years ago. They had been erased. Kevin Miller faced a worse fate. The evidence of his conspiracy to commit fraud was handed over to the district attorney. He was charged and later convicted. His desperate grasp for my money ended with him in a federal prison. I felt nothing watching them fall. No joy, no satisfaction. Just a quiet, final sense of closure. They were no longer characters in my story, merely a footnote in the preface. My story was about what came next. With the lawsuit over, a profound peace settled over my life. The fortress I had built no longer felt like a defensive structure. It felt like a home. Leo and I grew even closer. The ordeal had been hard, but he had seen firsthand the strength of the family we had built. A family of choice, not chance. He went off to college, not as a boy wonder, but as a confident, kind young man who knew, without a doubt, that he was loved. I poured my energy into the Eleanor Vance Foundation. We expanded our mission, opening shelters for homeless youth and funding scholarships for single mothers. I was becoming Eleanor, using my resources to give other scared young people the one thing they needed most: a chance. Marcus was by my side through it all. Our friendship, forged in late-night study sessions and hardened in legal battles, had deepened into something more. He was my partner in every sense of the word. He was quiet, steady, and he saw me for exactly who I was. He had seen my scars and had helped me turn them into armor. One evening, a year after the press conference, we were at the grand opening of a new youth center the foundation had built. As we stood watching a group of teenagers laughing and painting a mural, Daniel took my hand. "Look at what you built, Lena," he said quietly. "From all that pain, you built this." I looked at him, at his kind eyes and the gentle smile that had been a constant in my life for 2 decades. I thought of the long, lonely road I had traveled, the betrayals, the loss, the struggle. And I realized it had all led me here, to this moment of peace and purpose. "We built it," I corrected him. And right there, surrounded by the hopeful sounds of the future I was helping to create, I did something I had never planned. I proposed to him. I asked him to be my partner, my husband, my family, officially. His answer was a simple, heartfelt yes. There was no grand, dramatic moment. It was quiet. It was certain. It was real. It was a choice. My life, once defined by the choices others had made for me, was now a testament to the power of my own. I had reclaimed my name, my future, and the very definition of family. I had faced the ghosts of my past, not with anger, but with truth. And in the end, I had found something far greater than victory. I had found peace. The end of the story.